again. Living the moment till I die. And I'm gonna chase it. And I'm gonna chase it.
CMX Connect is a local program by CMX powered by Bevy to bring together community professionals all around the world. CMX Connect is for professional community builders and also the community curious, those people interested in building communities, online and offline. In Madrid, we offer lots of different events, from speakers to panel discussions and workshops. You even get the chance to network with community professionals in the city.
Living the moment till I die. And I'm gonna chase it. And I'm gonna chase it. I know it can't be wrong, no matter how hard we try. And I'm gonna chase it. And I'm gonna chase it. I know it can't be wrong, no matter how hard we try. No matter how hard we try.
I thought tonight's event was great. I'm friends with a couple of the panelists. It was very chill. It was very relaxed. I thought it was the perfect event for me.
I learned about CMX Connect Madrid through various Facebook groups. I'm part of She Here Refresh, as well as Eat Out Madrid, as well as some of the other ones that are Madrid specific. And CMX Connect Madrid is spoken about quite a bit in those spaces about this really great space to connect with other community builders.
What I really like about it is that you guys are like a real international community. So like I've been here twice, as I said, and what I like about being in CMX is that people are from all over the place.
Our first online CMX Connect Madrid event. How incredible is this? Yeah, the numbers keep going up. We got 42 participants, and we are coming to you live from Madrid, Spain. As you do know, our CMX Connect events are events that we have in person monthly to connect and learn from each other. But given the situation here in Spain, we are all on quarantine here in Madrid, and so we weren't able to meet in person. And so we thought, why don't we take this opportunity to take the event online so we don't have to postpone it and still run with tonight's topic. So thank you to everyone in Madrid who's taken the time to join us. And I'm just seeing in the chat here, we have so many people from around the world. So thank you so much, everyone, our global community, CMX community. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in. You were in for a real treat tonight. So to start off, since we have so many new people that aren't in Madrid and maybe don't know who we are, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Seppi, and I always say Seppi rhymes with Peppy. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. So if anyone from Texas is watching, let me know in the comments, but I live in Madrid, Spain. And so I am a community builder, social media marketer, and the founder of an online community called She Hit Refresh. I also run a community here in Madrid called Madrid Blogger Network. And then I'm the co-host here of CMX Connect Madrid with Valentina.
That's right. And my name is Valentina. I am also a community builder. I'm an events manager and I'm a community consultant as well. We seem to be in Madrid. We all wear quite a lot of hats, which is great during situations like this. I am so excited that we're able to make this work. The technology these days is just so great. And if I could even show you right now the setup I have in my apartment, it's crazy. So thank you so much for joining us. We're trying to make this online event as realistic as possible. So I actually forgot the bell. Oh, it doesn't matter. But I have a drink. So normally at our CMX Connect events, we give out drinks. So please grab a drink. I have some snacks, which I'll be munching throughout. So please get comfortable, please get involved with us. And yeah, if this is your first time at CMX Connect Madrid event, look at this, the bell just appears from nowhere. We normally have a bell at our event to get people's attention. So if you're asleep, not anymore. And yeah, I also want to give a big shout out to Nicoletta. She is our check-in and our on when we do in-person events, she's helping set up. Tonight, she's actually virtually checking in people via the Bevy app. So we're really grateful for Nicoletta to be with us virtually, as well as all of you. And yeah, I'm so excited to get started. So without further ado, there may be some of you watching this that are attending a CMX Connect event for the first time. You may have no idea what CMX Connect is. So I'm going to go through the 5 W's of CMX Connect. So first of all, what is CMX Connect? Well, basically, it is a local program by CMX, which is a San Francisco-based company that helps community professionals thrive through training and in-person events. And CMX Connect is actually a local program of that company. We're powered by Bevy. So for those of you that signed up through the official event page, that is the Bevy platform. It takes communities to in-person events. Obviously, this is not in person right now, but normally it would be. And basically, we are there to bring you everything and anything to do with community. So we really are very glad for you to join us. Who is CMX Connect for? Well, it's for anybody that's building a community, anybody that's thinking of building a community, or if you're just interested in the word community. So really, it's for everybody. Why have an event? Well, normally we say that in-person events are the best way to meet people. Now, of course, this is not an in-person event, but we are going to be bringing you a very special networking event later, which will help you meet people. So in general, events are great to bring people together. Now, when and where are events happening? So we are obviously in Madrid. We do events every month, usually on the first or second Wednesday of each month. But there's actually 52 different chapters in the world right now who are also offering in-person and online events with the situation. You can find out all about these at cmxhub.com. And if your city is not listed, you can create your own chapter. So yeah, this is a really great way to get community builders together in person and online and just learn and share from each other. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes I feel like I'm doing this alone and I'm really not. So that is what CMX Connect is all about. Now, this event would really not be possible without partners and sponsors. And every month we try and work with different partners and sponsors to bring you different things. For example, bringing you food and drink, or sometimes we have giveaways. Well, this time we have a very special partnership with Onyx's Audio Visuales and Eventos, which is actually mine and my husband's company here in Madrid. We provide project management, event management, now webcasting and podcast production. And we're really grateful that we're able to sponsor this to make it happen today. So if anyone in Madrid or worldwide is looking for help with their in-person or online events, please reach out to Adolfo. His email is at the bottom there, and you can get in touch with us. So yeah, but other than that, oh yes. So in order to get this webinar going with Zoom, it actually takes a lot of time and a lot of tech research. So I actually reached out to the CMX community and I got connected with Chris, who I believe is watching right now. Hi, Chris. He was giving me some really good help and he offered to help us out. So I wanted to recognize him. He actually has his own podcast called Peers Over Beers. Love the name. So if anyone is interested in and taking a listen to that, please do. Those that are in quarantine right now, you may have a lot of time on your hands, so why not listen to more podcasts? So yeah, I really want to recognize Chris. Thank you, Chris, for that. But also, we were meant to be partnering with some other people this month, and unfortunately that wasn't able to happen. So Seppi, would you mind just letting everyone know who we really want to thank in advance for trying to partner with us, and we hope we can partner in the future.
Yes, we're so grateful to our partners, Urban Campus, which those in Madrid know very well. It's where we hold our in-person events. They're an amazing co-working, co-living space. We were so excited to try Masal bagels, but hopefully at our next in-person event, we'll have those yummy, delicious bagels. And then, of course, our photographer, Gareth from GTS Life, who provides the amazing pictures every month. We hope to have him at our next event. So thank you all. We just wanted to recognize you, even though that we couldn't be there in person with you.
That's right. Now we're doing something very special. Actually, we're doing lots of special things in this particular March Connect, and we are starting a member spotlight. So every month we're going to be spotlighting one of our members of the community to basically share their story, their community, who they are with everybody else, because there are a lot of people out there building, and we just want more people to know about what they're doing in the world of community. So I want to bring a special lady who is very active in our community. She has been with us since the beginning. She comes to almost every single event. Her name is Lou. So Lou, I'm going to spotlight you right now. Let me see. And yes, can you tell us a little bit about you and your community?
Hi everyone. So first of all, thank you so much, Valentina and Seppi, for inviting me on tonight. It's an absolute honor to be member spotlight of CMX. So my name's Lou Stokes. I'm a style consultant and confidence coach. And my community is She's Magnetic. So this community is for women over 30 who are looking to basically step into their magnetic power. They're craving a different life and looking, to step into that power and really own who they are through self-love, confidence, owning the skin they're in, and cultivating their own authentic style. So why did I start this community? Basically, it was about a year and 4 months ago now. I realized that, in my styling business, there was something missing, that I would put these wonderful women in beautiful clothes, but yet they still didn't feel good. So I realized that from my life experiences, I went through an eating disorder, and basically through that realized how I needed to tap into myself and learn to love myself and have more confidence. And that way I could then feel better in my own skin, owning my style and the person that I am. So that's why I created this group, to bring women together, to basically help us all to inspire and motivate each other to become the best versions of ourselves and to step into our magnetic power. So yeah, basically, and today I just launched my podcast, She's Magnetic. It's funny actually, because it coincides with this event. So thank you. And hopefully you'll listen and give some feedback. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's my community. We only have about 328 members. It's a community that's very much about intimacy. So, I'm not constantly I'm obviously trying to grow it because I want more people, more women in there. But my priority is to keep it a safe and sacred space for people to share and feel comfortable.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Lou. Please share the link to the podcast in the chat so people can go on and listen to the podcast. And anyone else actually that has podcasts, please share the links. Sharing is caring. And then we can have a whole list of podcasts that we can listen to for the next couple of weeks. I know here in Madrid, we could be here forever. But, got to keep busy. So thank you, Lou. And,
thank you. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we are going to move on with tonight's agenda. So the reason why you are here this evening. So tonight's agenda, we are going to be starting out with a fireside chat with Paul from When in Spain. He's going to be talking with Seppi, who also actually has a podcast, which she'll tell you a little bit about with She Hit Refresh. We're then going to have a Q&A with both Seppi and Paul. So if you do have any questions throughout, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please post the questions there. Don't forget about them. And then when we get to the Q&A part, we'll be able to ask those questions to either Seppi or Paul, and hopefully they'll be able to answer them for you. Lastly, we are going to be doing some virtual networking over icebreaker.video directly after this Zoom call. We will post a link to that towards the end, so make sure you stick around for that, because this is a really great software. If you haven't had a chance to try Icebreaker Video, it's great, and it's a great way to meet new people, especially online with people that are in community just like you. So, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Seppi now, who is going to be hosting tonight's topic.
Thank you so much, Valentina. Yes, and thank you, everyone. Welcome to all the people who have joined us since we started. I'm seeing a lot of people from all over the world. Keep the chat and the comments coming. Let us know where you are and what your community is about. So again, my name is Seppi, and I'm so excited for tonight. Tonight, our topic is going to be podcasting, how you can increase engagement and growth for your community. And we are very honored to have our special guest, Paul Burge, who is a podcaster and the creator of the When in Spain podcast and community. So thank you so much, Paul, for joining us.
Hi there, guys. Thank you. Thank you to you, Seppi and Valentina. I'm absolutely honored to take part in this evening's event. So absolute pleasure to be here.
Perfect. All right. So before we jump into it, I just want to remind everyone, because I'm seeing people from all over the world. And I just in the beginning didn't give a lot of detail about the quarantine that we're under, just so people who are curious or maybe seeing Madrid in the news in Spain understand our situation here and why we've gone live. So in Madrid on Saturday, the government has instituted a mandatory nationwide lockdown. So all of us are confined to our houses right now here in Madrid and in Spain. And we're only allowed to leave to go to the grocery store and to the pharmacy. So for this event, we were not able to do it in person, and so we're doing it online. And most of us, are spending most of every day at home. So this is just amazing for us to have people from globally connecting. This is, our little social time that we get. And so thank you so much for joining us. And just to let you guys know, in about 12 minutes, you may have seen on the news that every day people go to their balcony and their windows and applaud all the health workers out there to show their gratitude. You will hear that during this interview. So we'll take a moment just to let you hear that, but just to let you know, if you start hearing something in the background, that's what that is. So without further ado, let's jump into this. I'm really excited for this topic because whether you're building a community around your podcast or vice versa, podcasting is a great way to grow a loyal listener base. And not only does building a podcast community create loyalty, but it also increases retention. And as we're going to talk about today, engagement and growth. And Paul and I both have different stories with podcasts. He started his podcast first and then created the community. And myself, I had the community first and then started my podcast. And so let's jump into it so you guys can learn a little bit more about Paul and his podcast. So Paul, tell us a bit about what When in Spain is about.
It's about Spain, obviously. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a podcast I started back in I think June 2018. So we're coming up to our 2-year anniversary, I guess, in a couple of months. And I've been thinking about making my own podcast since moving to Spain. And I think moving to Spain, moving to a different country, immersing myself in a different culture, a different language was certainly instrumental in me starting the podcast. I don't think it's something I would have done had I stayed back in the UK. But really, it's something for everyone. It's kind of evolved quite a lot, I guess, over the last nearly 2 years. And it's a kind of a collection of snapshots on lots of different aspects about life in Spain. I never really set out to make it a straightforward travel podcast. What I really, really wanted to achieve with the podcast, right from the outset, to be honest, was to give it the power to transport people to Spain. And originally I wanted to try and do that by exposing people to the sounds of Spain, my observations on life here. And, and at the beginning, it was just as simple as, walking around markets and ordering tapas in bars and ordering a beer. And these kind of, I guess, what you call sound experiences almost. And then I kind of, after a few episodes, I sat down and thought, what would I want from a podcast if I was thinking about moving to Spain, whether it was long term or just for a year, or if I was thinking of coming to work in Spain. And that was sort of really the beginning of the blueprint, I guess. So really it was about giving practical advice for people who are thinking of moving to come and work and study in Spain. I kind of tried to identify a few topics that people might find confusing or difficult. So at the very beginning, I produced a few episodes which were essentially kind of like how-to guides, you know, how to open a bank account, how to get your paperwork in order, all of these kinds of things. And then gradually that kind of got mixed in with my curiosities and my observations of Spanish culture, language learning. And then I guess after about 9 months of doing that, I decided that it would be a good idea to start inviting guests on the podcast on a kind of semi-regular basis to share their perspectives of living, working, and traveling in Spain. So I think for me, having guests on the podcast has certainly been one of the most enjoyable aspects of the podcast, and you know, through that, it's given other people an opportunity to share, you know, their ideas, their perspectives, their take on living in Spain, really. And you know, it's been great for me as a podcaster to meet other people as well, all over Spain and in Madrid, creatives who I probably otherwise wouldn't have met. So it's to answer your question, Seppi, it's a kind of very general podcast about life in Spain. It's quite broad and all-encompassing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I feel like, so there's a few things there. I think for most of us that start a podcast, we're kind of scratching an itch. So that's great, you know, that you live in Spain, you live in Madrid, you're curious about it. And given that Spain is I think it's the #1 tourist destination, is that right? I mean, it's a great topic to be tackling, #1 or #2. It's a great, great subject matter to be tackling because you can reach a very wide audience with the topic of Spain, which I want to get to then. How many listeners do you have and how many episodes have you made so far?
At the moment, I mean, this is a really good question, Seppi, actually, because this is the kind of golden number that every podcaster would really love to be able to pin down and know. I mean, I can only really, it's quite an elusive figure. I can only really make a prediction based on how many listeners the podcast gets, because, you know, as you know, as a podcaster, most podcasters have a podcast platform, a hosting service, which they use to basically syndicate a podcast out to all of the platforms where people can listen to it. And, you know, most of those platforms give statistics on how many downloads each episode gets and where people are downloading and things like that. So I would guess, at a guess, as an average based on downloads, we're looking at probably somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 listeners. And another interesting thing that I have in the statistics package which comes with my podcasting host is also how long people listen to that podcast for. Do they tune out after 5 minutes? Do they listen to half of the episode or not? And one great thing is that according to the statistics that I have, of those 3,000 to 5,000 regular listeners, they listen to over 95% of the podcast episodes. So of those, they listen to it almost right to the end. So I mean, that's something that is quite well known about podcasting, is that it has a really high engagement rate compared to maybe live videos or YouTube and that kind of thing. And actually last month, I'm really pleased to announce that I had a milestone for the podcast. It was my biggest monthly download since I began the podcast. So there we go. So some episodes attract more than others, depending on the theme of the podcast. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. 3,000 to 5,000. For those that are new to podcasting or don't have a podcast yet, having a listenership of 3,000 to 5,000, I mean, anything in the thousands is a very big achievement. So congrats on that. Like I had mentioned before, I have my own podcast. I started mine about a year ago in January of 2019. And I would say probably per episode, we get around 400 listeners. And so you can see the difference. And it is not easy to get listeners. So way to go. Kudos on getting them in the thousands. Where are your listeners located from your stats? Can you see, are they mostly in Spain or are they around the world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Seppi. I would say the overwhelming majority of my listeners are actually based in the United States. I would say, in fact, probably around 2/3 of my listeners are based in the USA, according to the stats that I have from my podcast hosting service. And so overwhelmingly the US. After the USA, the next biggest audience is actually right here in Spain. And then I can give you like the top 10 if you like. After Spain, it's the UK, and then Canada, and then Australia, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden. Although I have listeners in 143 countries, but these are, there are some countries that have one listener. So I'm absolutely amazed. And this was something that really surprised me when I first launched the podcast. Is like, it's fascinating to look at these stats and see where people are listening. And there are people listening to what I would say is a fairly niche podcast in, very far-flung corners and quite exotic parts of the world, really.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, I think that's great. That's a great part of having a podcast. If you have a community, so you can just reach a wider audience, but a wider audience and reach more listeners around the world. But you did it the other way. So you built a community around your podcast. And I do want to talk about that a little bit because that's really interesting. Because you have a very loyal listenership, it sounds like. When did you get the idea of starting a community, or was that always an idea? And why was it important to start an online community for your audience?
Yeah, sure. To be honest with you, when I started the podcast, it wasn't my intention at all to start a community around the podcast. And I think I really produced a podcast for probably about 5-6 months before it kind of occurred to me, to try and grow it somehow. At the very beginning, I was just letting it grow organically. I was just basically hoping people would discover the podcast, out of nowhere through Googling or searching for it. And I think, I realized that I had to create a community. For me, Facebook seemed like the obvious choice at the beginning. I mean, I guess purely because so many people use the platform. It has a huge user base already there waiting, basically. And the other thing I noticed as well is that there were a lot of Facebook communities about Spain, but they weren't that great, if I'm honest. I know it sounds a bit bad, but they were a little bit trashy, a lot of noise, quite incoherent. It was a bit of a free-for-all, lots of advertising, lots of spam, and not really, from my point of view, a huge amount of value. So I thought there was a space for a general group about Spain, to ask each other questions about life in Spain and to share quality content and that kind of things. So I set up a When in Spain Facebook page and then a group. And the other most important thing that I realized over time was really to make the podcast a two-way conversation rather than me just talking at people once a week. I wanted to make it more of a two-way conversation, and by creating the Facebook community, it allowed people to reach out to me and say, even if it was just like, hey, I liked your podcast, or I didn't enjoy your podcast, or I think you should have included this, or you could have talked about that, right up to generating a conversation of people talking about whatever the episode was about, to share their points of view about whatever the given topic is. So it was really about giving listeners a chance to make it, ask questions to me and each other around that podcast experience as well, making it more two-way.
Yeah. By the way, can you guys hear it? Hear the clapping?
Clapping outside my window here.
We're going to clap here as well. We are clapping for all the health workers out there that are working so hard to keep people alive here in Spain, just showing our gratitude.
I can give you guys
Thank you, Paul. Yes, virtually clapping. Thank you, people, virtually clapping for us. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's beautiful to hear every day.
Dozens of people out in the street clapping right now and banging pots and pans, showing their appreciation to everyone who's working so hard to keep the coronavirus under control and saving lives and putting themselves at risk as well. It's a really heartwarming thing to witness.
Yes. Yeah. Someone says, if I don't know, what did they say? If that's not community, I don't know what is. Exactly. So we've been doing that since Saturday, and we're doing that every day during the quarantine. All right. So back to the questions here. So that's great. How did you convert your listeners to community members? Was it simply just asking them in your podcast and letting them know, and they easily and quickly went over there?
Yeah. It's kind of there's two sides to this for me, from my point of view with the podcast. it's quite hard to know, to be honest, for sure, which has had the most effect. It's a bit like the sort of chicken and the egg. I don't know whether, of course, I announced the Facebook group on every podcast episode, and told my listeners that it existed, and encouraged them to join, and told them about it and what they could do, and they could converse with other When in Spain fans and other Spain fans in general. So yeah, as soon as I set the group up, I announced it in every episode, and I noticed a steady growth after I'd been announcing it. On the flip side, I also started sharing every podcast episode in the group that I created, as a way of promoting it to people who may have found the Facebook group by chance and maybe didn't know that it was a podcast, or didn't know about the podcast. So it was a way to share the podcast, to share links, to get people to click on it and to listen to it. And I also, once I'd created the group, I started sharing that group in probably dozens of other Spain-related Facebook groups as well, where they allowed me, without spamming people too hard, to increase membership to the When in Spain group. And that definitely had a noticeable effect on my download figures. But what I really noticed that had a big effect on people joining the Facebook group was not so much sharing individual podcast episodes in the group, it was actually sharing the group in other groups, like I said. And that had a huge effect. And in fact, I think after doing this for a couple of months on a weekly or twice weekly basis, I noticed that the group really started to hit that kind of critical mass in terms of people asking to join the community. And I think I'd gone from maybe 10 new member requests each week to well over 100 member requests each week. Now, that now does seem to have settled down, as I've kind of dedicated less time to sharing the group, and I think I've hit that kind of critical mass now in that respect. Yeah, I mean, the group now has just over 3,000 members, and I think now I'm getting about 30 or 50 new members per week.
That's great. Wow, 3,000 members in your community, and that's great. And podcasting and communities are a great way to reinforce each other. Like you're saying, the community is driving traffic to your podcast, and through your podcast, you can drive traffic back to the community, which is fabulous for me too. So just for those out there that listen to She Hit Refresh, so I started off with a community. I have a community called She Hit Refresh. And then I started the podcast about a year into my community. And so most of my traffic most of my listeners come from my community. And as you said, using social media and finding ways to not spam other groups, but get the word out in other groups is a great way to get new listenership to your podcast, because it is hard to get visibility for your podcast. It's not that you just start a podcast and boom, on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, you're going to show up in the search automatically. It doesn't really work like that. So you do have to work hard in the beginning to get that visibility.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Just on that note, Seppi, I think, and particularly with Facebook, and I think with a lot of social media platforms, they're all kind of designed for promoting, visual content. They're usually designed to promote video or photo content. And I think that's something that still, hopefully will change. It is quite challenging to promote audio on Facebook in a kind of visually striking way that people realize that it's audio and to click on it. And again, also on Instagram as well, it's still quite difficult. I've heard rumors in the podcasting community that Facebook is thinking about launching some kind of interface on Facebook which will allow people to share podcasts and audio content more easily, without having to convert it into video content and things like that. But I totally agree with you, Seppi. I think promoting podcasts via social media at the moment is still kind of in its infancy. It's still quite a challenging thing to do, to give podcasts visibility. Yeah.
Okay, great. A question here, because so you have a community for your podcast, When in Spain. You are definitely posting about your podcast in there, but every post can't be about your podcast. So what kind of content are you posting in the group, and what kind of conversations are people having?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something I realized quite earlier on after I created the group, that just sharing the fact that I'd made a new episode every week really wasn't giving it much traction. So what I decided to do was start sharing news articles that I'd found on the internet that I found interesting, English language articles, because it's an English language podcast. So I would, scout around on a daily basis looking for interesting news articles in English about focusing more on culture, Spanish culture, and more unusual stories. I try to avoid, current affairs and things where, constantly evolving. I try to avoid a lot of articles about sort of politics and that kind of thing. And then also I ask group members, to share their content, to share photography, photos, and of course questions to the group, which of course happened, and that generated a lot more traction in the group as well. In every podcast episode, I emphasized, this is your place. The Facebook community is your place as listeners to share any questions you have and ask questions of other members in the group. It's your place to share content that you think people will be interested in. So yeah, I still find that quite difficult, to be honest. From my point of view, it's quite challenging to think of fresh content all the time, on a daily basis, or even several times a week. And I'd say probably it's something I'm doing a bit less now than I should. And it's something I'm thinking about now. Obviously, I reshare. It's a useful place to reshare old content, older podcasts that maybe new members to the group missed and weren't aware of. And so I share old episodes to give them some new life, bring them to attention of new members and that kind of thing. And I'm also, regularly announcing in the group that, it's a podcast, it exists. These are the platforms you can find it on, because as you know, there are new platforms being created all the time for podcasts. So it's a useful place to do that as well. The other thing which is really useful is the welcome message. When you get new members into your group, it's a great way to, it's a great opportunity to remind them that, hey, this is a podcast. Of course, this is a place for you to share anything you like, Spain related, but it's a great way to direct new members to the podcast via links, etc. Basically with the ultimate aim of them listening to the podcast, to be honest.
Yeah, of course. So I love a few things that you said there. And for those community managers out there who are watching, that curating content is a huge part of managing a community. Giving people interesting information about Spain, how you're finding, relevant things that maybe aren't controversial, but just the right things for your audience, but also encouraging them to engage. I think that is so important to not constantly, but to periodically, remind that your members that this community is for them, and that they, should participate, can participate, just prod them a little bit to get them to engage is really, I think paramount to having an active community, a highly engaged community. All right, so I want to shift focus a little bit and ask you the $1 million question. Do you make money from your podcast?
I do. Yes, I do. Amazingly.
You deserve a round of applause for that, because I want to say, I don't want to discourage anyone from starting a podcast, but if you're starting a podcast to make money, that should not be your number one driver, because it's really difficult and it may not happen. And if it happens, it may not happen for a long time, and you're not going to make a lot in the beginning, at least. So tell us, so you're making money. So tell us about that.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, don't go into podcasting with a view to do it solely to make money. The money, if you're lucky enough, is a secondary thing. I make a little money each month. And I must at this point give a big shout out to my amazing and kind and loyal patrons. The way I help fund the podcast at the moment is through Patreon. So my listeners, my group of very loyal listeners who are incredibly kind and pledge an amount of money each month. So at the moment I'm making enough money to basically cover my costs in terms of the subscription that I pay to the podcast hosting service, and editing programs that I subscribe to, graphic design programs, things like Canva and that kind of thing. And then I guess I make enough money from it as well to basically cover around a third of my time that I invest in making the podcast, maybe a little bit more, between a third and half of the time that I invest in making the podcast as well. So yeah, I mean, for me, it was absolutely amazing to have the support from patrons almost as soon as I put it on Patreon. I mean, I think I've been making the podcast for well over a year before I decided to actually put it on Patreon. And I had a Patreon account, but it had nothing in it, and I wasn't using it. And I started gradually mentioning in the podcast episode about supporting the podcast if you enjoy it. And I think sometimes maybe I talk about that too much in the podcast episodes. And I was absolutely blown away by the generosity and the kindness of listeners who quite simply wanted to support the work that I do, not expecting anything in return at that stage. So yeah, I mean, it's been fantastic. But you know, at the end of the day, it's a hobby, it's a passion project, which makes a little bit of extra money to kind of cover the costs of making it. Having said that, I am in the process now of kind of for each episode developing bonus content, trying to give the patrons something back, and I've kind of reorganized my tiers on Patreon, if anyone knows Patreon and how it works. So yeah, it's really heartwarming to see that people care enough to give up some of their hard-earned money to support the podcast that I produce, and long may that continue.
Yes, congratulations. No, it's amazing. I was just looking at your Patreon last night and you have 53 patrons, which is unbelievable. And that just, shows how loyal your audience is, because it does, it's not easy for someone just to, decide to start giving someone money that they're listening to that they may not even know. I started a Patreon also for my community. So I didn't have that many patrons. I think I had 5, and with 5, that was bringing me in maybe like, I don't know, I think like $130 a month. But I love in your podcast how you mention it in every episode. I didn't do that. I haven't done that. So I'm going to start doing that in the new season, because I think it's also just the more visible it is, right? Or the more people hear that there's a Patreon option, the more likely they are to be a patron. So way to go on your 53.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. I think, a lot of people, like you said, don't know what Patreon is exactly, or they don't know that it exists. So I think, if you're a podcaster or if you're any kind of content creator, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to say, hey guys, if you like what I do, there is the option to, show your appreciation via Patreon. And yeah, that's great.
Great. So if anyone uses Patreon, let us know in the chat comments. Okay, so we have about 7 minutes till we go to Q&A. So I have a few more questions here I want to run through. So I do have a question, because we're talking about how podcasts can help increase engagement and growth in your community. So when you started having guests on your podcast, did you strategically choose your guests, or were those guests that might actually help you contribute to the growth and engagement? Was there any strategy behind that?
To be perfectly honest, I never had a strategy of choosing guests based on, that they may be able to boost my downloads or give me more visibility or more growth. However, having said that, by having guests on the podcast, that definitely has happened. And I think it's a great way to grow your audience by having guests on podcasts, for sure. And I think, for many guests that I've had on the podcast, I've certainly noticed a spike in downloads, above the usual amount for, a non-guest podcast, for example. So I would definitely say that, yeah, having guests does help. It helps spread the word. And of course, it makes sense, because, when you have a guest on your podcast show, that guest tells their followers, their fans, their friends that they're on the podcast, so it attracts more people to that show. And hopefully, a percentage of those people stick around to follow the podcast longer term. They don't just listen to that one episode because someone they know is on it. So yeah, I would say it's definitely worked, but that was never my initial strategy, not at all. I mean, one other thing on this point that I would say is, for me, by having guests on the podcast, has helped me discover other future guests. I mean, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with a comedian called Richard Marshall. He was talking about humor and how he uses humor to adapt to life in Spain. And he put me in touch with his friend, who's a photographer who's been documenting the Romani community here in Madrid. And I've since recorded an episode with him, Mike Diamante is a photographer, all about his interaction with the Romani community in Madrid, and fascinating insights. But, I would never have probably discovered him had I not had, Richard as a guest on the podcast previously. So that's actually my next episode. So it's also a great way of networking for future guests as well.
I agree. And not just networking. I know you do a lot of your podcasts. You do all of yours in person. Is that right?
Where possible, but I have done many podcasts via Skype as well when it hasn't been practical, to meet face to face. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I do all of mine virtually, but having guests on my podcast and having been guests on other people's podcasts, I now have this virtual network of amazing peers. And it's just been a great networking opportunity. So I think if you want to be known as a subject matter expert in your niche, or just want to network with certain kinds of people, a podcast is a great way to rub elbows with those people. So next question here, and as we wrap up, I do want to talk a little about being a guest on other people's podcasts. But before I do that, is there anything that you do on your podcast to encourage engagement in the community? Do you do anything like give shout outs to people in the community on the podcast, or answer questions that come from the community on the podcast, or vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I definitely give shout outs. I give shout outs normally to my patrons as a kind of personal thank you to them, which I think they appreciate. I often post questions in the Facebook group, and then I relay those answers to the questions through the podcast episode, and that kind of thing. One of my favorite things that I did as well, which was a lot of fun, which generated a bit of buzz, was I asked my listeners to share in the Facebook group where they listen to the podcast, and I asked them to send a photo of where they listen to the podcast and what they're normally doing in their weekly routine when they listen. And I got some really fascinating responses. I had a photographer who listened to it while he was walking around Manhattan in New York. I had people who had health problems saying that they did it when they were doing their exercise, walking around their park. But my favorite was a guy who listened to the podcast while he was cutting the football pitches of the Arsenal United Football Club in London. I thought that's such a random place to be listening to a podcast about Spain. So things like that, that's a lot of fun. But I mean, to be honest with you, Seppi, yeah, this is something I need to do more, I think, in my podcast, is to find ways to encourage that engagement in the community, to making the kind of Facebook community overlap more and integrate more with the Facebook listeners, because of course many of my listeners don't use Facebook, and many of my Facebook members still don't listen to the podcast, which is kind of curious. So it's kind of trying to get that fusion and that integration on both sides there. Yeah.
Interesting. I love that idea. I think I'm going to do that with my communities. Ask them to send a picture of where they are when they're listening to that. I love it. All right. So we just have about 1 minute here before we go into Q&A, but I did just want to touch real quick briefly on being a guest on other podcasts. That's something that I know I've done a lot of. I've been a guest on your podcast, and I'm actually the first guest on Lou's podcast. She's magnetic, so make sure you guys listen to those. But I think that being a guest on other podcasts is just such a brilliant way to expose yourself to other audiences, or have your community become exposed to other audiences, and have that cross collaboration. And have you been on other podcasts before?
I actually, as yet, I haven't. No.
Oh my gosh, you need to get on that.
I need to get on that. I need to get on other podcasts, but I would love to. If anyone's listening and would like to chat to me on my podcast, more than happy.
That is amazing. And I'll just give you guys a few tips here. If you're looking to be a guest on someone else's podcast, you don't have to have your own podcast to be on someone else's podcast. But what you do have to do is pitch. So like Paul just did, he was very proactive and putting it out there, letting people know. I'm going to put myself out there too. If you want me on your podcast, let me know. But if you're looking to be on someone else's podcast, these are just some tips for you. One, definitely look for podcasts that have a similar audience. You really want to maximize the opportunity to reach members or reach listeners who would be interested in what your community is about, what you're going to talk about. So definitely find podcasts with similar audiences. And how can you pitch other podcasts? Email is the best way. I saw in a group someone asking about creating a media kit to pitch. You don't need that to pitch. Really, just sending an email out will work. That's what I've used, and it worked. The odds are, or what's the word I'm looking for? The percentage that you're going to be asked to be on a podcast are actually quite high because people are always looking for new content. So send a pitch, and in that pitch, just make sure that you're clear on letting them know what topics you can talk about. So make it very detailed. In mine, I know I can talk about, and I gave them 4 different topics. Let them know, kind of your stats and how big your community is. Let them know what the benefit for them is. And yeah, those are my starting tips for how to get on someone else's podcast. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the fireside chat. We're going to move into Q&A. But Paul, thank you so much for this. I hope everyone has enjoyed that. And I've seen the questions come in. And so we're going to be taking questions in the Q&A. So Paul's going to be sticking around for that. So let's move on to that. We're going to do Q&A for 15 minutes here. Hey, Valentina. There she is.
Did you miss me?
We did.
So thank you so much, Paul. I just want to say that actually me and Paul recorded a podcast. I don't even know how long ago it was now, but I just wanted to share some like...
Maybe. I can't remember. Yeah, last year, was it?
Last year we went to a cafe and it was a lot of fun. Since then, with my community out Madrid specifically, like people have been messaging me saying, I found this community through the podcast. And I was like, wow, like this is really working. I don't have a podcast myself as much as I would love to. It's just on one of my lists of things to do, but I've been featured on maybe 1 or 2, and I'm actually going to be featured on Lou's podcast in the coming weeks. So yeah, it is great. I love talking, as a lot of you will know. So it's really good to get the word out there. And for those of you that are not very good on video, this is the perfect alternative to kind of sharing your message and sharing your community or whatever you're doing in life. So yeah, as a person who has been featured, I would definitely recommend it. That's where I was going with this. So we've had questions flooding in for you both. So I'm going to get straight into it. So first of all, there's been a lot of talk about equipment. What do you need to buy? Do you need to spend a lot of money? Like talk to us, you both, about what we need to get started equipment wise.
Okay. I mean, if you want, Seppi, I'll kick off with this one. From my point of view, when the first, I think maybe 5 or 10 episodes that I made, I basically had 0 equipment. I actually used my smartphone's voice recorder, which actually worked out quite well, because when I was recording out and about and around Madrid, and I felt a bit kind of self-conscious of recording in very public spaces, it just looked like I was speaking to someone on the phone. And actually, you know what? The sound quality is pretty decent on, smartphones these days. For me, it was more important than sort of agonizing on which equipment to buy, was to simply start making episodes, start speaking, start getting out there. So you don't need a lot, you don't need to spend a fortune. But yeah, from that, I progressed to a fairly cheap €30 microphone on Amazon and started with that. And in terms of my recording device that I use now is exactly the same, and it's my smartphone as well. I've always recorded into my phone and then moved it into my laptop or recorded it into my laptop. In terms of editing, I've always used Audacity, which is a completely free program. It's quite easy to use once you get to grips with it. It's certainly sophisticated enough to edit a podcast. So, Audacity, a cheap microphone for about €30, or your voice recorder on your phone to start off with is fine. I've since progressed to a better quality microphone. But, I would say more important than that, just get out there and start recording and start making episodes.
Yes. Oh, y'all know I agree with that. I'm all about start before you're ready. So just quickly, I'll let you know what I use. Also, in the beginning, I just use my smartphone, probably for the first 6 episodes. So don't try to get all this fancy equipment to start. You can start without that. I now have upgraded to a Blue Yeti microphone, which is probably about like $100. I got it Black Friday for the deal. And then for editing, I use GarageBand, which is free on a Mac. And then why don't we just share, because I saw this question come up. I think a few people asked is, what platform do you use? The platform that I use to host mine is Anchor. Gonna be honest with you guys, I am not someone who's into the details, so I did not research 10 different platforms and find the right one. I just like to start fast and then I can pivot later. So Anchor's free, it's easy to use, and a lot of people were recommending it for newbie podcasters. So that's what I use. There have been some questions like, does Anchor own your content? Anchor does not retain any ownership of your content, but they can use it for promotional and some other things without your permission. I'm not too worried about that, but always, I think it is good to be suspicious about things that are free. It's, I wouldn't be surprised in the future if Anchor starts moving to a paid model where to keep your content on there, you're gonna have to pay a fee, probably, maybe, but I like Anchor. Let us know about, what do you use? You use Audacity also?
I use a platform called Blueberry, but it's spelled Blubrry. I think when I started almost 2 years ago, I don't think Anchor was like so known then, or whether it was just starting. And I did loads of research, reading all sorts of blogs about podcasting, and it came down really then, a couple of years ago, to two hosting platforms. One was Blueberry, and the other one was called Libsyn. And they are much of a muchness. The price, there's very little difference between the two, and I just opted for Blueberry, and I've been using Blueberry ever since. I've never had a problem with them. I think it's something like around $20 or $25 per month is their middle of the road package, and I think that gives you around 200 gigs allows you to upload 200 gigs of audio content every month. So it's way more than I need, but I've found them to be really good. If I've had any technical problems, they're really responsive. Their tech team are really good, and it's quite simple. It's a very simple platform to use. Yeah.
All right. Next question.
All right. Next question then. Let's see. Who do I go to first? How do you monetize by podcast questions? Is the question I've got here from Hamlet to Paul. How do you monetize by podcast questions?
Podcast questions. I'm going to be honest. I'm not quite sure what podcast questions is.
Oh, well, maybe Hamlet can clarify that for us. We can move on to the next question in the meantime.
Okay.
I haven't heard of it.
All right, Marissa then, is how long did it take Paul to reach the number that you said? And congratulations for such a great achievement.
Thank you. It's really taken me up until probably, what are we now, March, the beginning of this year, probably about January was where I was, or just before Christmas maybe, where I was routinely hitting those numbers. So we're looking at around 18 months, I suppose.
Okay, perfect. Now this is a question to both of you, I guess, from Anna. Do you think podcasting is increasing popularity in Spain with Spanish speakers in particular?
I will go for it. I'm going to say I don't know, because my podcast I listen to all English-speaking podcasts. I'm not really like in the know in the Spanish world. And yeah, I don't know many Spaniards that are listening to it. So I'm probably not the best person to ask. Paul?
I've got to agree with you, Seppi. Being an English language podcast, I know I do have some native Spanish speakers listening, but in terms of in Spain, how quickly and to what extent podcasts are catching on as a way of consuming content, I really couldn't say. Only that I know that really in general, globally, podcasting is now starting to really get into its stride, and is moving into the mainstream. But specifically for Spain and the Spanish population consuming podcasts, I could not give you an accurate answer, I'm afraid.
No worries. Well, it's good to mention that actually, Seppi, your podcast and Paul, your podcast are actually in English. In Madrid specifically, like there's a huge English-speaking community. It's incredible, and the fact that we do all our CMX Connect events in English actually surprises a lot of people. So a lot of us are, I guess, separated from the Spanish, the true Spanish way of life, if that's even the right words to use. So if anyone does have any insights on the podcasting in Spanish, please let us know. Or if you have any resources, please let us know. Yeah, we're going to move quick. Yes.
All I can just add is that I think out of my circle of Spanish friends, I don't think many of them do listen to podcasts, and that's all I can base it on, really.
Good to know. All right, next question. Anika Lee, I hope I've said that right. I'm sure I have. She is interested in any apps, tips, or resources for doing podcasts, recording podcasts virtually. So I guess, Seppi, this is a question for you. Like,
Yeah.
how can we do this?
Yes, I saw Nikoli's question come in. Yes, that's a great question. So all of my podcasts I do remotely. So I use Zoom, which we're using right now, to record podcasts. It's just the most user-friendly. The last thing I want to do is send someone a link to something that they have to download and take all these steps. So Zoom is very easy, and I can record just the audio and video, and then I can strip the audio and put that into GarageBand to edit. So that's what I use. And that's probably the only product. Oh, and to make my life easier for scheduling, I use Calendly. So I just send people a Calendly link, and it has my availability, and people can just sign up there. And in Calendly, it actually asks them the questions that I need for my blog post, like their name, their bio, and certain questions that I need them to fill out. And so it just saves me a lot of time. So Calendly and Zoom would be my two apps to use.
Yeah, and for me, I don't record remotely very often, but I've always used just Skype. I've just used Skype, and that's worked okay for me. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question is from Piper. Piper says that sometimes a lot of people think that podcasting can seem more difficult to kind of put together than writing a blog. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but the next part is they're curious on how folks are able to get inspiration for new podcasts on a regular basis, because I guess the idea is to bring out a certain amount of episodes, certain amount of seasons. Like, how do you put that all together and get ideas for topics or people to be featured?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, I think podcasting, I think all of the mediums, you can play off your different strengths. So if you're not a strong writer, podcasting may come very easy to you. And if you don't like video, maybe writing's for you. So I don't think that podcasts necessarily are more difficult. If you have a community, you have a playground to know what your people want. And that is a great place to get ideas for content for your podcast. And I think if you're just reading other podcasts, reading other blogs, listening to podcasts, or just talking to people, you'll get ideas, and just write those down. And that definitely is what gives me inspiration, is just being open to other people's contents and just kind of keep a pulse on what people are talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Seppi, totally. I think it depends on the individual. I mean, I like writing, but I think for me, I find it comes to me more naturally to talk and record my voice. I think it just depends. I wouldn't say that one is any more difficult than the other necessarily, just that it depends on what comes more naturally to you, yeah.
All right, great. Now, Aaron has a couple of questions. I'm going to go into one first. What is the most successful way to have good interviews?
That's a really good question. Really good question. I mean, for me, if possible, I do prefer to interview face to face. I think it adds something to the interview. I know that's not always possible. Preparation, doing your research basically on your guest. Is absolutely vital, and coming up with a decent list of questions. I think in terms of practical advice, always allow more time than you think you need to conduct an interview. I think in the past I've been guilty of like penciling someone in for 45 minutes or half an hour, and it's taken like triple that amount of time. So, and the worst thing is like trying to make someone feel pressured to race through the interview in a short space of time. It doesn't lend itself to a good interview. And also, I think you need some time with the guest, especially if it's the first time you're meeting them, to warm them up. Just have some friendly, general conversation in the first place to begin with, not just like rocking up and sticking a microphone straight in their face. I think as well, making your guest feel at ease, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree. Research is number one. If I can, I will read blog posts of my guests that they've written or listen to their interviews on other podcasts. Also, researching good questions. Tim Ferriss has some great content out there on what great questions to ask. Do that, and also be an active listener. So you may have your list of questions that you're going to ask the person, and while you're in conversation, don't feel so rigid that you got to stick to those questions. Really listen to what they're saying so that you can ask questions that your audience is probably having as they listen. So I think those are some tips that I can offer.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. How much time have we got, Seppi? I know you are timekeeper today.
Well, we are at the 15-minute mark, but we have a lot of questions. You want to go on for
Yeah.
maybe 5 minutes more?
Yeah,
Sure.
I think we should go for 5 more minutes because
Yeah.
I think these are really valuable questions. So Lisa has a question. How do you prep your mindset before a podcast like meditation, deep breathing, or something else as the hosts of the podcast? Do you do anything in particular?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that's important. I think for me, especially if I'm recording an episode, I need to be in the right frame of mind. If I feel tired, you can hear it in my voice. And I've noticed this because I have recorded episodes when I've been tired. If I feel stressed or I feel like I'm not feeling very motivated that day, it all seems to come across in the episode. So, I mean, for me, and I know not everyone has the luxury, but I would say, we're all, people talk a lot about, getting the podcast out on exactly the same day all the time, and it has to be, you can't be late. I think in a way, I've never noticed any problem with not publishing, on a set day, but I think it's much more important to be in the right frame of mind and to feel like you want to talk to people, because at the end of the day, it is like a conversation with an audience, and you don't just want to churn it out when you're not feeling particularly happy or relaxed or whatever. So I mean, that's all I do. But other than that, I don't do any specific warm-ups or anything like that. I probably just make myself a cup of coffee before recording.
Great. Seppi, anything?
I think for me, I really like to just read over my questions and read about the person I'm interviewing beforehand. I try to do that the half hour before. And yeah, I don't have any rituals, but what I do is give myself space before the interview. So I won't book any calls or other interviews or anything where I have to be talking to someone before that podcast interview, because it really does drain my energy. And so to be in that right mind frame and to conserve my energy, the podcast is kind of the only active speaking I try to do on the day of.
All right, great. Question from Jordan. The pros and cons of podcast length. Like, is there a certain length it should be, shouldn't be? Talk to us about length.
It's a really good question, because this is something that people have debated about endlessly since podcasts have become quite, mainstream now. And that there is this like sweet spot. And when I did my research before starting the podcast, some people would say you can't do more than half an hour. Some people said it's fine to do 40 minutes, others 45, some people say an hour. From my point of view, I would say, anyone thinking about podcasting, don't get too bogged down in how long the episode is. The important thing is that, some episodes you have more to say, or you have more elements in your podcast, and it warrants a longer episode, and other episodes not so much. And I think, in my experience in the last 2 years, nearly, I have not noticed any detrimental effect whether I've published a 25-minute episode or I've had a couple of episodes which have been 1 hour or 1 hour 5 minutes long. I mean, my advice would be to say, yes, probably keep it with under an hour, and maybe 45 minutes is kind of the sweet spot. But I think people will really get too bogged down in it has to fit exactly in 30 minutes or whatever. I think it depends on what you have to say, who your guest is, what kind of material you're recording, what different elements you have in the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, let's get onto something that's personal to you. Do you have any favorite podcasts, both of you, aside to your own podcasts?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I have so many. So 2. Okay. Well, everybody knows, because I'm always talking about this, Gary V has been my ultimate favorite in the past year. I actually haven't listened to him much in the last 2 months. So I guess right now my favorites are Pod Save America, which is about what's happening in America politically. And the other one that I just love is How Did This Get Made? And it's 3 comedians that talk about really bad movies. And it's just hilarious.
Nice. And Paul?
For me, I like a podcast called The Alarmist. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Investigates failures. It's a very entertaining listen. It's kind of history. It's a kind of like modern history podcast looking at history's greatest failures. I like one which is kind of educational called You're Wrong About, and it's sort of looking at past media stories and a couple of topics, a bit like sort of like the O.J. Simpson trial, the Challenger disaster, Tonya Harding incident, things like that. It's very entertaining. And I do listen to a couple of other podcasts about Spain. There's a great podcast called the History of Spain podcast, which I really enjoy. So it's always good to sort of keep up with, not the competition, but what other people are talking about Spain. And I also listen to a podcast by El País newspaper once a week, which is like a news digest about Spain called Que, which I like as well.
Nice. All right. I know we haven't got much time, so this question is for Paul. Any special incentives you give to your patrons who support your podcast?
Yeah, great question.
La Litha. I hope I've said that right.
I do, but this is actually something I've only really started doing in the last few months, to be honest. My first flurry of patrons, became patrons purely because they enjoyed the podcast and that they wanted to support it. But to answer your question, bonus content, really, what I'm trying to do is some live videos. I've actually set up a separate, this is the Patreon platform as well, but I also have a Facebook patron members group where I do live videos for them. I'm trying to produce video content which accompanies the podcast. I do Q&As. What else do I do? At the moment, that's all, but I really, time permitting, thinking about creating a newsletter as well, and more behind the scenes stuff as well. But really, at the moment, it's basically visual bonus content that accompanies not every episode, but most episodes, yeah.
All right, great. And one last question. This is for Seppi. Do you always write a script for your podcast before recording it, or you do it on the fly? This is from Kristen.
Yes, thanks, Kristen. So I never write a script. I do have my questions outlined, so I know kind of as a guide how I want the journey of the podcast to go. And like I said before, I do stick to it a lot of the time, but if I'm listening and other things come up, I will pivot and go down that path. So I don't have a set script. When I do record the intro and the outro, those kind of things, I do have a script, because it is really hard to say something and record it. Try saying a few sentences with the record button on. It's so easy to get tongue twisted. So I do have a script for that. But for the general interview, I like to let it flow and let it feel natural. So I use the questions as a guide.
Right.
Exactly the same for me, Seppi. Yeah, exactly the same.
Perfect. Okay, I have one more bonus question. Do you have any famous people listening to your podcast?
No idea.
Oh, no, because Blake is asking, do you have anyone like Ronaldo, Messi, Marcia Sanchez, Vetusta, Moria, like, I guess they're all Spanish people. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. If they do listen, I'd love them to get in touch and come and be a guest.
Okay.
You know those people, tell them about our podcasts.
Exactly.
Perfect. All right, I think that's all we've got time for our Q&A. So once again, thank you, Seppi. Once again, thank you, Paul. Everyone give a virtual clap to them both. If anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. I posted all of the social media links in the chat. We're all over social media, so you can get in touch with us. And we also have a Facebook group for CMX Connect Madrid, so you can find us in there as well. But yeah, that is the end of our podcasting topic of March. So thank you, both of you, for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your experiences. It's really helped. So we are going to move on, and we're going to move on to what's happening for next month. Seppi, please tell us.
Yes. All right. So next month, look, the date is, we're talking about, next month is April. So
yes.
The next month, our next
event has set in.
No worries. So our next event is going to be on Wednesday, March 15th. And so we are still exploring the topics, but Valentina and I will come up with a few topics, and then we're going to present them to the group in a poll and let you guys vote on what topic you would like to hear. So stay tuned for that. And we don't know yet if that will be an in-person or online event. We're just going to see how the quarantine goes. But if it is an online event, we'll be doing this once again.
Can I just say you also said March?
Oh, did I? Sorry, April.
We are getting so confused here, we don't even know what day it is. So please excuse us for our lack of like being here. Anyway, so yeah, April 16th. We'll send that all out to you once we get it figured out. Moving on, be more social with us. We would love for you to be in touch with us after all of our connects. As I said, we have a Facebook group for Madrid, CMX Connect Madrid, where we post live videos. This is where we're going to do the poll for our next event for you to choose the topic. There's also a CMX Connect Madrid Facebook page, which you can join as well, where we post the public events, so you can share with all your friends and family. There is the CMX Hub public group, which is CMX's group that has over 10,000 community professionals from around the world. So if you want to reach out to people all over the world and get advice, tips and tricks on how to do different things, that is the place to go. If you're a Slack user, there's also a community on Slack with lots of different channels for you to join. It's very active all the time, and you meet some great community professionals over there. And last but not least, Instagram. In Madrid particularly, Instagram is used a lot. So if you have been taking photos and videos, please share them. Please tag us in those. We love to be featured on your different Instagram stories. You can tag CMX Connect Madrid, and we will share it from there. And the hashtag CMX Connect is the global Connect account for all of the chapters in the world, and then hashtag CMX Connect Madrid, and then obviously tag all of us as well. There's a cmxhub.com, which has lots of different resources like CMX and Chill, which is, as I mentioned every event, all of the videos from the summit from 2019. So those that are in lockdown with us and you have some free time, you can sit on your sofa, grab a drink, some snacks, and tune into some of the community professionals that were at the summit in 2019 talking about a variety of topics. So that is how you can be more social with us. Moving on, what about being a chapter member, Seppi?
Yes, and before I do that, I just want to clarify, because I think we said a few different dates. So just checking the calendar. The next event is on Wednesday, April 15th. So I want to clarify that. And hello to all the Texans that are giving me shout outs. Thank you for watching. So become a chapter member. Yes, if you're not yet a chapter member, please come sign up. What does this mean to be a chapter member? Well, if you're a chapter member, then you are on our email list, and that means that you're going to be the first ones to know about the next and upcoming events. So if you want to stay on top of what's happening with CMX Connect Madrid, sign up so that you are in the know for everything that's coming up. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as we bring this to a close, do not leave yet. We have our icebreaker session directly after this. We want to say once again, thank you to Onyx's, Audiovisuales and Eventos for helping us put this event together and being able to broadcast to you wherever you are in the world. If you do need any help with event management, webcasting, podcasting, project management, installations, equipment hire, worldwide, let me and Adolfo know, and we'll be able to help you out. All right. And last but not least, who wants to come for some virtual networking? We are going to be going over to Icebreaker. Seppi's going to be dropping the link in the chat in just a few seconds. This is a really cool tool for us to network with our video. It's with video and audio. And what's going to happen is we're all going to join. We're going to get paired off with one another. We have prepared some questions for you that are related to podcasting and community and some other little weird ones in the middle. So you can virtually network with each other over the internet. And we hope that you come over and join us. So if you do decide to, and you click on that link, please exit the Zoom straight away, because sometimes Icebreaker and Zoom get a bit confused with the cameras. But I think Seppi's already shared it into the, are you doing it now?
I'm going to do it now. But I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I'm going to hop over on Icebreaker and see you there. So just stick around, because Valentina is going to give you just a few more bits of information for Icebreaker. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching, and I'll see you at Icebreaker. I'm dropping the link here for you, but wait till Valentina finishes, get off Zoom, and then come to Icebreaker. Bye.
Bye, Seppi. So yes, for those of you that don't know Icebreaker, it's a great tool. So come over and join it, and maybe this is a great tool for your communities. We're going to be doing a few different rounds of 8 minutes with each other, so you really get to know one another, find out a little bit about each other, and hopefully you can use this again for your community. So make sure you go into the chat, click on the link now, and we will join you over in Icebreaker in just a few seconds. Thank you so much for joining us for this March event, our first online CMX Connect Madrid event. We hope that we will be with you again, whether it's online or in person next time. Please share CMX Connect with all your friends and family. And once again, if there isn't a Connect in your area, you can start one. It's a great way to meet people, great way to learn about community. And yeah, we just have so much fun doing it. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Wednesday, and we will see you over on Icebreaker. Bye for now.
Bye.